Hi again. We are painting. Today we're going to try a little beach scene with a happy little palm tree. And we have our palette right here. We've got our couple of brushes. We'll use a couple of flats, a small and a large, and our paper towel and water to rinse with, and that should be all we need. I've drawn out in advance a little pencil line to show my horizon line so it's nice and flat. But other than that, we'll just do all painting, not much drawing. And we'll start with the sky. We're going to mix our blue and white together. So we want the sky to be darker at the top and gradually get lighter as it comes down to the water line. And so I'll just pull out mostly white with a little blue. There'll be more white than blue. And this color is not quite as turquoisey as the original painting. If you wanted it to be a little bit turquoisey, you could just barely dip your brush in some of that green and add that in, and that will make your sky a little more of a turquoise color. So let's start with this big brush, and we're just going to make nice long horizontal brush strokes, starting at the top of the canvas, and we'll gradually add white as we come down. Maybe not quite yet. We'll still have a little bit of a darker value. That's pretty. It's got a little extra green in it that didn't get mixed in, but we can go back over that. There we go. So we're just going to keep dragging that pretty sky color down. And these long brush strokes make your sky nice and smooth, and then we'll slowly add in white to lighten. Hopefully you can see me mixing. And I'll pull that back up into the dark just to get a nice blend. And then I'll add a little more white. We want to see this gradual change from dark to light. And if it's a little bit streaky, that still works. It still looks like sky. Even more white. Let's get pretty light as we come down here. If you want to paint the edges of your canvas, that's nice for hanging it on your wall without a frame. It looks nice and finished, so I'll just kind of drag some of that sky blue around the edges. There we go. And so that is step one for our sky. I'll rinse my brush out now. Wipe it off. And I'll go straight into plain white here to create some little fluffy clouds. The blue is still wet, so it's going to blend with the white, but this will be first layer for clouds. So I'm just going to start with kind of a wiggly horizontal line, and then add some little raised areas for some puff. And there's going to be a palm tree here, but we can put clouds behind our palm tree. More convincing. Still just dipping into the white. There's a little bit of blue on my brush, but that's okay. Drag that along there. And ideally the clouds will get smaller as they get closer to the horizon line. So we'll do little bitty clouds here. Long line, fluff it up. Long line, fluff it up. And we'll come back to those here in a minute and do some more layers on those clouds. I might make this one a little bit more substantial. We'll give him a little more bulk. There we go. kind of overlap a little bit. Maybe make this guy a little bit taller. And I'm trying to be careful not to duplicate my cloud shapes so that it looks a little more natural. Maybe a little more over here. And that one kind of disappeared into the sky, so a little more white on him. Okay, so there's the beginning of some happy little clouds. If you want, you can play with your finger and come in here while it's wet. I'm just using my pinky very lightly and just kind of do a circular motion into that little cloud. This is optional if you like playing. And just kind of blend those back in a little bit. And I'll still add another layer of white after that dries a little more to give them a little more sense of depth. Some bright whites and some shadow whites. So we'll start now with our water. And our water will be a mix of the dark green, the dark blue, and white. So we can make kind of a turquoisey, hopefully pretty ocean color. So this green, little blue, same colors we used in our sky, just a little less white and a little more green. So that's a nice color right there. That's about half blue, half green, and just a smidge of white. Let's try that. And the trick though is to make sure your horizon line, see if I can drag a line here. I'm just pulling away. There we go. So that's a nice little horizon line. When you look at the ocean from far away, you don't see waves or anything. It's nice and flat. So that makes it more convincing that we're looking at water if we don't have an uneven line back there. All right, so that's a start. When we're going to draw a beach line here, so let's say we've got kind of an uneven beach. Let's do something like that. And now, kind of the same thing with the water that we did with the sky. It'll be darker towards the horizon and get lighter. Actually, maybe it's the opposite. It's darker at the horizon in the water and lighter towards the shore. So I just picked up a little more white and mixed into what I already had. And this is just layer one. We'll make it more interesting. We'll add some variety in there. And with, just like the sky, we want these nice long horizontal lines. So that's a start for our little water. That's looking all right. Okay, but we want to do more than that with it. So let's switch to our smaller brush and let's add a little more variety. Maybe we want a little more green blue, a really dark color without the white in it back here. See if I can get that to show up. Well, when the paint's wet, it just tends to drag the wet paint with it, so you don't really get a darker color. So we may decide to get a sand color down, and then we'll go back for detail. And we'll just do one layer, and then we'll go back to the dry layer and add more detail. So we're just going to go back to that big brush, rinse all that blue-green out if you can. And our sand, beaches come in lots of colors, right? So there's more than one sand color. Sometimes the sand's almost completely white. I'm going to give mine a little hint of tan, and this brown is nice because it's kind of a pinky brown or a red brown, so it makes a nice kind of beach color. You could add a little yellow, that gold, if you wanted. That looks kind of like sand. Let's see what that does. very, very light. So I want a little more color in it. So I'll go a little more brown, a little more white, a little more brown. And that's better. That's got a little color, so I'll see it. Yeah, that looks like a good beach sand color. Now I may not have mixed enough. So let's go back, add more white. There we go. And this is just a base. We'll add more to it. I'll come up here to my water line and just kind of flow along that edge. So I make sure I cover all the canvas. Oh, look at that, I got blue in there. Well, that's okay. I'm going to just blend it in with my sand color. No big deal. There, it almost disappeared. And a little variety in your color doesn't hurt anyway. Makes it more interesting. Okay. So that's a base. That went pretty fast, didn't it? Now we may rinse most of that light out and just go back in with some of that brown alone, almost pure brown. And we're just going to, while it's wet, just kind of suggest some shadows in the sand. It wouldn't be probably just one flat color. So I'm just dragging in a little extra there. Maybe it'd be a little bit darker sand towards the edge of the water where it's wet. So I'll drag a little bit of that brown right along the water's edge. And then kind of blend back. Soften that back in. Look at that, it happens fast. All right, so these probably, we're working so fast. Yeah, that's not really dry. It might be dry enough to do a little cloud stuff. So I rinsed out my small brush and I'm just going to go back into plain white and come back into these clouds and kind of focus small circular brush strokes. And I won't cover the whole thing in the white. I just want to have some light and dark. There we go. Let's do that again with another cloud. Let's come over to this guy. And we're just doing small circular. You can leave the edge of the cloud more of the blue blend. And you can do this several times until it does start to look a little more like a three-dimensional cloud. You can have some little wispies that come off. Just kind of trail it out there. All right, let's give this guy a little more definition right in here. And this way we have a little more depth in our clouds. Maybe this guy over here would want a little bit of that. Let's change it up a little. We'll give a little. And then our small clouds on the horizon, this little brush is good for. So we don't want these guys to get too big. Ideally, they'd really get small as they go back in space. Does it look like clouds? Yeah, it looks like clouds. We're gonna call that good. Maybe a little more down here at the base of this guy. Okay. So that's a happy sky. We can live with that. And our water is pretty close to dry. Right along here, I got a little thick with the paint, so I'm going to wipe that out. I also Oops, oops, oops. Oh, see what happens when you start playing around with your fingers? Okay, so right there I'm going to cover that with a little bit of sky blue where I made a boo-boo. But it's acrylic, and that's the nice thing about acrylic, is that it's very easy to cover. There, that's gone. So let's put some variation, maybe even some little waves in our water. So we're going to use the small brush and some plain white, and the technique is not too different than clouds, really. We'll start with a horizontal line, come up into that, above that little horizontal line. You do want the base of your waves to lay nice and flat. So I'm just doing a very loose interpretation of these little clouds. I'm sorry, waves. Sometimes painting and talking at the same time are difficult. I lose my words. And then I might just want to drag a few soft white lines through the water. In fact, I'm going to come back with a lighter watercolor. So we used blue and green, and I'm going to just add a little extra white to lighten it up. And just, well, but I've got to be able to see it. If I put it on the canvas and I don't see it, it's not light enough. All right, so I'm just trying to give it a little sense of light hitting the water, I guess. And if that looks too much, all I'll do is take the original watercolor of blue-green plus a little bit of white and drag that back through there. So I can put in and I can take out very easily, and that means it's good to experiment and see what works. So that was a little bit too light. Come back here on the horizon, really darken that water right here. And I still want a little more suggestion of lighter value up close here, and I'm just not quite getting enough white in it. Let's see what I can do. Okay, there's a little more white. So if I decide maybe the top of this wave is a little misshapen, I can take my watercolor and do kind of a negative space thing where I paint back into it, as long as I'm using the same color that's behind the wave. So you can adjust them. And go back to some plain white and maybe just kind of, oops, that had water in it. I want to make sure I don't have water in my brush, mostly paint. And then maybe focus just on the tops of the little waves, just a little dabbing. So it's a little bit wider at the top of the wave. That helps give it a little more sense of depth. Yeah, something like that. So that's not bad. And if it's too bold, I can kind of knock it back in just a little bit. Okay, that is almost convincing. So do we want to do anything else to our water? The other thing is that you can come from underneath your wave and kind of flatten that out. That's an easy way to get them a little bit thinner. Just come right underneath and use a nice horizontal brush stroke. All right. What do we think? Does that look like water? I think it might fool people. Who knows? Okay. Let's see. Come back under there again. I might even drag a little bit of this lighter color almost white. Now see, that's too much. That got away from me. So I'll come back with my watercolor. That's got more of the blue-green in it. Soften that back in. Now that's getting better. That's got a little more light coming up towards the sand. There we go. Okay, we're gonna call that good. And then we can do the little foam around the edge of the water. So we're just gonna kind of focus white and a choppy little brush stroke, not really straight, a little bit irregular. And just bring that foamy edge in on the sand. I won't do it along the whole sand line, just kind of a broken line. And this is where I think it would be helpful to have a little darker shadow with the brown right underneath that. So I'm going to come back in here and do a broken line right underneath where it's breaking on the sand. All right. So I think that brings us to our little palm tree. Actually, now that I look at these clouds, which are now dry, I think I'll do a third layer of white. So I'm going to come back in one more time and only highlight a few little puffs on the cloud. And I'm still using that circular brush stroke. Kind of nice light touch. And that's really going to give them a little more sense of being three-dimensional. Yeah, that works. Okay. So really we're to our little palm tree. So this usually makes people a little nervous, but we're going to take black and brown, mix them together with the small brush, and we're going to bravely make a line. So the palm tree, the palms start about right here in that little cloud, so I'll come right below it, and I'm just going to make a nice little curved line right through my painting. Oops, little drip. There we go. And the trick is to start out skinny, because you can always make your tree thicker, but if you make it too thick to begin with, it's hard to skinny it up. We've done it. It's just a lot of work because you have to paint all your sky and your water and everything back in. So start skinny, get thicker is a good plan. So I'll just go over that again with that black-brown mix, and I'm going to start thickening up the trunk. And it should be thinner at the top and get a little wider at the base. All right, and it'll take a couple of coats to really get it where we want it, but that's what acrylic's all about, is layer, layer. I think that'll work. And we do want a little shadow coming off our tree to ground it. So you can use that same color to just kind of pull out. Now, this part is probably the trickiest from painting this with people in the studio. Getting the palms